So anybody that recommends them, I can't understand it because when you look at the sum of men and women, I hasten to add, it's not like the often I've heard on social media, there's no research. That's not true. There is research in women, less than men, no evidence. And so I don't understand why somebody would recommend it.
Welcome back to Fuelin Sessions. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall, and today I am joined once again by Professor Stuart Phillips. Stu, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, we were chatting just before we got started, and I said hopefully we won't offend too many people with this short, sessions on, I would say, a persistently controversial topic is probably the best way to outline it. Maybe not controversial, but maybe controversial in the sense that they still continue to be recommended. And what we're talking about today is BCAAs, or Branch Chain Amino Acids, and whether or not they have any place in an athlete's supplementation regime, I guess, is probably the best way to think about it. And I reached out to you because I saw a very funny Instagram post that you put up, and I would refer everyone to Mac and Prof is the Instagram handle, but you had one for Mino Henselmans, and he had a lovely tile which had a review. BCAA supplementation is, you'd scrubbed out the title and added the word useless. And I had a good laugh, and I read a lot of the comments, shots fired.
Sure.
But I thought, look, I reached out to you straight away and thought, you know what? There's been several reviews, not necessarily too many systematic reviews or meta-analyses that have showed any value. But I thought, let's get into BCAAs and hear what Prof's, Mac has to say about BCAAs. So let's get into it.
Well, so I feel like first I need to apologize to Menno because, I know Menno and he's a friend and I respect the hell out of the posts that he does. They're informational. They generally start with a title of a paper, and then they have a paper shot. And then as you slide across, there's information. And the truth is that, when he got to the end of his slides, it was, there's not much evidence for BCAAs. And I just said, well, we can shortcut all that. And I thought I was being funny. But honestly, several people said, well, that's exactly what Menno said. I said, I know. But mine was way funnier. Come on.
Yours was way funnier. And
So, I want to, publicly first say to Menno, like, I apologize if I upset you or Menno's followers and fans. That wasn't the intention, but it was just to, save everybody's pressed for time, right? So I thought we'd just cut right to the chase, and I thought useless was the right conclusion.
Well, mate, to be fair, I don't think anyone's going to be offended, because I think if anyone has read any of the research and the science around it, I think your summation in a single word probably is bang on. So I don't know Menno, but I doubt he would be offended given where it's coming from.
I think that's fair.
So, mate, why don't we start with like the origins of BCAAs and maybe just explain again. There will be people out there who are like, what the hell are they talking about? What are BCAAs, branch chain amino acids? What are they, and how does it relate to sort of protein?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this last time, but quick refresher is there are proteins in our body. Muscle is one of them, but literally everything. Our skin is made of protein. Even parts of our bone are made of protein. Our heart, our lungs, our brain. So everything other than the fuel we burn, which is carbohydrate and fats, is made up of protein. Like, it's just different forms and different structures. So we need this stuff. And, obviously we have daily requirements for this. Protein's made up of 20 what are called amino acids. And they're like the bricks that are in the walls that are protein that make up our whole bodies. And of those 20 bricks, 9 of them we need. We need to get them from our diet. So we need to eat, milk, eggs, animal protein, chicken, beef, fish, that sort of thing, or plant protein as well, peas, legumes, etc. Um, and of those 9 essential amino acids, the 9 that we need to get, 3 of them are what are called branch chain amino acids. And they, without belaboring too much the structure of what these things look like chemically, they all have what's called a branch chain. So there are carbons that come down and branch off and split, and that gives them a certain chemical characteristic. And I think, you could probably, if you haven't taken nutrition, it requires a little bit of a quick sort of, crash course in nutritional physiology. So when we eat protein, we chew it, swallow it, goes into our stomach. It mixes around with the acid in our stomach, and then it goes into our intestine. And the amino acids or the proteins are then broken down into amino acids and absorbed. They go across what is our usual, what we call our gut epithelium. It's a fancy name for our intestinal lining. And then it goes through the cell of the gut. It actually goes right through the cell, and it goes into circulation into something called the hepatic portal vein. And I know, just slow down, Stu, like too much technical terms. So the long story short is that the blood that drains our gut doesn't go actually directly back to our heart and get pumped out. There's sort of a filter step in that it goes immediately from your gut, from your intestine to your liver. And your liver plays a massive central role then in sort of determining which things it takes up and it keeps for itself, or it lets out on the other side. And let's just say that, if you eat 100 grams of protein, which is a lot of protein for the record, but we can digest that, no problem. It takes a while, but, is that probably only 50 grams of it actually gets out into circulation. So the liver, clears and sucks up about 50 grams of that. And, for reasons that I'm sure people are like, oh, why does that happen? And I can't give you the answer. But a lot more branch chain amino acids come out of the liver and are present in circulation. When we look at the composition of the amino acids in peripheral tissues, particularly muscle, again, for reasons that aren't readily apparent, they're very enriched in branch chain amino acids. And so, I think that's part of the origin of the hypothesis that branch chains are important because they're present in higher than you would expect quantities in muscle. Muscle is important. Therefore, if we're trying to build muscle or maintain muscle, we need more branch chains. And so, I think that's the essential origin of the hypothesis. And, there's scientists do weird things. And so let's just say that at one point, groups of scientists were taking muscles out of experimental animals. And, apologies to anybody that doesn't like animal testing, but this is what people do. And they put them into a bath and try to keep them alive. And you very quickly realize what a great job your circulatory system does, because these muscles die really quickly. And through probably trial and error, but this sort of sense that, well, we need to give this muscle sort of what it needs to live. And they put the branch chain amino acids in the bath around the muscle, and this muscle lived for much longer. So again, it's this sort of science signal to say, these things are important. They're a big deal. They keep muscles alive, and muscles are high in these. And so I think that, this is the origins of sort of, where the importance of this hypothesis comes from, if you like, why they're out there as a supplement.
Okay, and that's a really good sort of history lesson of where they came from. And just so I'm clear, and I again, you may have just said this, but I might have just got lost in your little history lesson.
Sorry.
No. BCAAs, what are they exactly? Which ones are they? And how does it relate to what we call essential amino acids, because all these acronyms, EAAs, BCAAs, they get thrown around a lot. A lot of people talk about them, but I don't think they actually understand what they are. So I
Yes.
just like, why don't you just say, how many amino acids form protein? And then
Yep.
what are essential amino acids? And then what are BCAAs?
Right. So the umbrella that goes over the top of all amino acids, and there are 20 of them that we usually talk about. There's a few odd ones, but just 20 basic physiological amino acids. If we put the umbrella over the top, that would be AAs, amino acids. The umbrella over a subcategory of the AAs that are essential are EAAs. So they're essential amino acids. And then the umbrella under that umbrella, go on.
Why are they called essential amino acids?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So of the 20, 11 of them we can make. We can, our body has the metabolic machinery and the substrates, the carbons, the nitrogens, the oxygens, and it can put them all together, no problem. The essential amino acids we can't make, and so we need to get them from other proteins in our diet, which, as I said, animal protein, plant protein, not really a big deal, but somewhere there.
Okay, so
Within,
the nine are important to consume.
yes, exactly.
Okay. So that's a key point, I think, for everyone, that those nine
Absolutely.
we can't make, our body can't make them, so we need to get them from somewhere, whether it be animal or plant. And they're the nine. And then there's the branch chain amino acids, which sit within the nine essential amino acids. And what are they?
So they're a subcategory of the essentials. So of the 9, the 3 are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And again, I don't want to overcomplicate things, but they all have a structure that a bond extends from the central carbon down to another carbon, and then there's a branch off of that carbon to other carbons. So if people remember their chemistry, maybe they don't, but so anything that's carbon and hydrocarbon is not very soluble in water. So these things are what we refer to as hydrophobic. They don't like water, and but that's probably going too deep into it. But so three of the 9 are branch chains.
The hydrophobic is probably interesting because it does potentially relate to, I imagine it relates to the mixability of branch chain amino acids, which if you've ever had a branch chain amino acid supplement, it tastes terrible, very bitter, but also doesn't mix very well. Does that relate to the hydrophobic property?
Absolutely. And so we do experiments where we mix these amino acids into saline and we actually infuse them into people so that we can trace where they go. And the students, it's a student job for sure. Supervisors don't do this stuff. They just tell students how to do it. Have to mix these amino acids. And when they mix leucine or isoleucine, which we don't do very often, or if they were to do valine, they spend a lot of time putting it into what's usually saline and trying to dissolve it. It's let's just say they're there for a while. Whereas if you took another essential amino acid that's hydrophilic, that likes water, easily goes into solution, no problem. And so, that's part of their characteristic.
And look, I don't want to get too deep in the science because a lot of listeners probably are like, well, just tell me if they're any good.
Sure.
You mentioned, and then within those branch chain amino acids, you mentioned valine, isoleucine, and leucine. And leucine is probably, again, one of the amino acids that a lot of athletes will have heard about.
Yeah.
And where does leucine sit in this picture of BCAAs and, isolated and whatnot?
Yeah. So the analogy I like to use, I think it works, is we're building a brick wall and we're putting all 20 different bricks in a specific order. And that order is determined by what comes out of our genes, essentially. There's something called messenger RNA, and it's like a template. It says, put this brick here, this brick, this brick, this brick. And when we're making a protein, these bricks get put in a specific order, and that's what gives a protein its characteristics. Of the three branch chains, you would expect, well, they're just going in randomly, and with all of the other 17 amino acids and the other six essential amino acids. But in muscle, there's more branch chains getting put in as bricks than you would expect. And so hence, as I said, their preponderance in terms of abundance within muscle tissue. But leucine, and this is a very what we call highly conserved process, because it happens not just in humans, but rats, mice, like goes all the way down, even in yeast. Leucine is an amino acid that actually triggers and turns on the process of making new proteins. So it's not just a brick, i.e., it's not just a substrate and a brick being put in the wall. It's as if when it shows up, it triggers all of the machinery to say, okay, we got to start making proteins now. And so if you give people or animals diets that are low in leucine, their rate of making new proteins goes down. If you give them diets that are higher in leucine, their rate of making new proteins goes up. So we call it a trigger amino acid, so to speak.
Okay. And I think that overview of amino acids, essential amino acids, non-essential amino acids, branch chain amino acids, and leucine is a really good sort of a synopsis of how does this relate to BCAAs. And in all the studies that we saw, like you've mentioned there, leucine. Leucine is a key trigger. I think anyone who's read anything around muscle protein synthesis, muscle building, any of these studies has clearly seen that leucine is a trigger. Now, does leucine on its own result in muscle protein synthesis or muscle building?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And the reason it does, it's because it's as if you imagine this is a construction site, to keep going with the brick in the wall analogy, all the bricks are there and ready to be put in the wall. And then leucine shows up at the construction site, and it's like, okay, it's time to go. And so you actually don't need more bricks coming in. You can keep making the wall with the existing bricks that are there. But what we know is that when we eat protein, and all of the amino acids go up, then they flood into tissues, in particular muscle is an example. That, if you like, is sort of the pool of bricks that then becomes the new wall. Now, if you just provide the leucine, the trigger, then it will use the existing bricks that are there. But at a certain point, there has to be a signal that feeds back and says, whoa, hold on. We only have a few bricks here, and we don't have more bricks coming from the outside. So the process stops. And similarly, if you were to give, everybody says, oh, well, the branch chains, they're different. And I still hasten to add that if it's leucine that's triggering the process, having the two other amino acids, isoleucine and valine, still means that there's 17 other bricks that are not missing, but eventually when you're putting them into the wall, the same sort of feedback says, well, hold on, we're missing 17 bricks here. And so the process slows down again. And so there's nothing magic about isoleucine and valine, but the leucine itself is the trigger molecule, and it gets the process started. So the answer is yes, it works, but only for a time. And so you need the other, beyond the branch chains, the other six essential amino acids, and you need all of the other supporting cast, which are the 11 non-essential amino acids.
Okay, so have there been studies done where leucine is supplied versus branch chain amino acids?
Yes.
And looking at muscle protein, and what was the result?
So this is where things get a little bit complicated. Everybody's like, he goes, "Oh, I've lost him already." But hopefully, if you're still with me, and if I were teaching this in a class, I put up and say, "Okay, hands up if you're with me," or keep your hand up if you're not with me, right? So, okay, so 20 amino acids, and then 9 of them are essential. Within the essential, we've got these three special branch chains, but I'm telling you that only one is kind of like the big deal. It fires up the process, and if you don't have it, then it doesn't work, or if you just give it and don't give the others, it doesn't work. So I think the sort of ethos is if you think about the branch chains themselves, they all have this characteristic, what we call side chain. That's the branch chain. And it's as if these cells, excuse me, these amino acids use a specific door to get into a cell. And usually that's a transporter protein. Because those three amino acids share a common chemical structure, they all use the same door. And the way these doors, these proteins and cells work, when it's like if 100 people try to get through one door, you can only sort of get through one at a time. It's like everybody's standing there, and the truth is that the amino acid that you really need to win to get in through the door is leucine, because without it, you don't trigger the process, you don't stimulate protein synthesis, and it doesn't matter. Now, when you have all three branch chains in high abundance, they actually compete with each other, not just for the door into the muscle, but actually the door across the intestinal cell as well. So they compete for each other for the same door for uptake into the intestine and then into the circulation, as well as into the muscle cell itself. And so it's sort of like, if you were to give leucine you think of it as a drug, you're giving two other drugs that sort of compete with the drug that you really want to have there, and that's leucine. So the two others, when you include them, actually lessen the effect of leucine. And, we've done that work. In rats, it works a little bit different, but in humans, at least, we can turn on the process of protein synthesis with leucine. If we provide even a little bit of protein along with a high dose of leucine, everything works fine. But when you add the two other branch chains, in addition to leucine, it actually switches off the leucine effect, if you like. And I know people have manipulated the ratio of these branch chains in supplements because they recognize the importance of leucine. And so it's like 4 times higher than the other two. But that still doesn't negate the problem, which is if you just provide the leucine, it's going to go for a while, but it's not going to go as long as if you ate either essential amino acids, which some people do, or you ate protein, which is what I usually recommend because there's a few other things in protein foods that taste good, that provide you with nutrition that you need, and probably what we're doing day to day anyway.
And I think and thank you for that. I think you said something really interesting there as well, which maybe takes us back to the history lesson. Is you mentioned around rodent studies, and I think a lot of the initial hype around BCAAs was hypotheticals, theoretical models, and then rodent studies, which showed decent amounts of muscle protein synthesis. Would you say when they did supply
Yeah,
BCAAs?
yeah. And I think, the pathway for quote unquote drug discovery is we screen small molecules in a dish. They work in cells. The promising ones, we move on to what we call preclinical work. It's usually rats or mice because there's lots of them. They're all inbred, as opposed to humans, we're outbred. Um, so they respond relatively homogeneously. Like, they're all kind of like their brother's cousin's cousin. They all have the same eyes, same coat, and everything. And things look promising there. Then, if they were a drug, we would move them on to what we call phase 1 human clinical trials. So, this is not a drug. It's a nutrient as well. It's food. So at the same time, you could sort of say, oh, well, it's not like it's curing this or it's curing that. And you'd be right. But enhancing athletic performance, and then you've got a few trials in rats, and these rats run for longer and all of this sort of stuff. And, you know, what I point out to my students in drug discovery is that probably about 5% of compounds that are screened and go through all the testing for, rats and mice make it to any type of trial in humans. So now those trials, it's 5% of the 5%. So do the math. Like it's the funnel is like this to discover a drug. If you apply the same logic to branch chain amino acids, you get the idea why they might work in rodents, but there's very limited evidence that they quote unquote work in humans.
Okay. And if we then go to the human studies, and you mentioned leucine, and you mentioned dose, and you mentioned manipulating the dose, the usual dose is what, 2 to 1 to 1 is what you tend to see with leucine to valine.
That's a lot of supplements. Yep.
What is the dose of leucine in an isolated supplement that you have seen in the research create this trigger effect?
Yeah, so I mean, the trigger it's not so much an on-off switch. It's sort of more like the dimmer switch. And so, 1 gram of leucine with all of the other essentials, the light goes on. 2 grams of leucine, the light goes on. 3 grams, I think, in young, healthy, fit, people who are exercising, probably the light is, switched on all the way, and you can give 5, 6, 10 grams, and the light doesn't get any brighter. Older people, less active, people on bed rest, patient populations, it might go a little bit higher. You might need as much as, say, 4 or even 5 grams. Now, multiply that up in food, and that's a lot of food. And so, a lot of people have talked about just adding leucine as a supplement to, make food better. The phrase is, I pimped out my meal with leucine, right? And the truth is that sort of works for a while. And like a lot of biological systems, once you've given the stimulus a few times, the system resets to become a little less sensitive. So, constant consumption of high branch chains upregulates, and it's a very responsive system. All of the system, particularly in muscle, which is where these amino acids are used for their disposal. And by disposal, I mean you pull the nitrogen off, which every amino acid has, that gets shunted away and you make urea. And you take the rest of the branch chain and you burn it as fuel. And the number one preferred fuel as a branch chain in muscle is leucine. So the more leucine you keep giving, it upregulates all the systems to burn the leucine, probably because it's a trigger and it's pretty important in regulatory process. So the system's like, whoa, we're getting too much of this. We can't keep making the wall all the time. So I'm going to turn up all the systems to just, as soon as the brick comes in, it does its job. Now I'm going to burn it. And, so that's sort of the quote unquote, the downside of constantly flooding the system with leucine and the other 2 branch chains is that you're upregulating the disposal systems for these amino acids. And I know a lot of people sort of, they go, well, like I can overcome this, I can do this. But, if I said, if you're a young person and you're physically active, your muscle is very sensitive to leucine right off the bat. So, and let's say you're following, your recommendations because you're a smart guy. You've got all your athletes are dialed in. And as you said last time, I said, well, how many women are eating 1.6? You go, every woman on my program. And I'm like, oh, wow. So if you're up at that level of dietary intake, and then you're thinking, well, I'm going to make it better by adding these branch chains, it's a waste of time. The system's already tapped out and at its maximum capacity, and now all you're doing is giving it a fuel. It's not doing anything in terms of the adaptive process. You get that covered with diet. That's not a big deal. So you're eating all the protein, you're following all the recommendations, and so then everybody goes, well, I like the taste, and I can't compete with that. I'm like, if you like the taste, I'm like,
the taste of the taste of branch chain amino acids.
Wow. Buddy, I'm with you. I'm skeptical because I've tasted all kinds, And
Yeah.
there's none of them that I go, oh wow, that's killer. Like it's sort of like, and maybe I mess around with these things too much. I'm like, was that? I'm like, oh, that's leucine, bitter as hell. And
Yep.
so as soon as I do, I go, I can taste leucine. So but like once you've dialed in all of these other things, and the meme I've enjoyed the most is, it's a water polo player playing in an outdoor pool, and it's raining, and buddy's taking a drink, and it's like I'm getting my branch chains while I'm surrounded by water in the rain, and it just seems like an insane strategy to follow to try and amplify something where the switch is turned up and it's like, oh, the lights are all on. How
So you're
how high can you go?
Well, I guess that's a good question, isn't it? It's yeah. So you're saying if someone was taking, look at the lower level of what we recommend is around that 1.6 grams per kilo. Like let's say someone is up 1.8, 2 grams per kilo of protein, and that's protein in the form of food.
Yep.
Potentially adding in, say, a whey protein supplement or a plant protein supplement. How much leucine would they get from that intake if they're eating a varied diet of protein sources?
So it varies by food,
For sure.
and it probably for lots of reasons you can imagine. It might not surprise people, but so nature does it best, right? So the period of life when you're growing more than you ever will and should is when you're first born. In your first year, you double in size. Like, never again in your life will you do that, right? So nature figured it out, and so breast milk is enriched in branch chain amino acids. Go figure. And so, to that point, it's sort of, it makes some sense that you've got milk proteins that are enriched in, and if you're drinking cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, doesn't matter, any mammal that's producing milk, if you could get the source, that's one of the richest sources of branch chains that we had. So where does whey come from? Well, it's one of the most digestible, highest leucine milk protein that we know of. The other one is casein. It's digested a little differently, but the bottom line is the two of them together, there's no protein that's higher in leucine, and then it's sort of what we call essential amino acid score than milk protein. So if you're drinking milk, if you're eating dairy, eating yogurt, I don't know how it works in your part of the world, but we have Greek style yogurt here,
Yep.
and it's higher in protein. You go over to the UK and then Europe, and it's, like I said, the Greeks go, that's just yogurt. So like, fair. But if you're doing it through diet, as you suggest, and the intakes that you're having your athletes hit, how much higher than high can you get? Like the switch is on and it's turned off, and they eat again, it's turned on, and it's maxed out each time. So my guess is you're probably, those athletes are probably up around 15 grams of leucine a day. So if it's a per meal serve and they're hitting, say 3 to 5 grams, no amount of branch chains is gonna do anything, even if you like the taste.
Yeah. And I think it's an important point as well, because you talked about that dimmer switch. You get 1 gram and it goes on, and 2 grams it's getting brighter, and 3 grams, again, and just clarification, is that applicable for males and females?
It's about the same. I mean,
Yeah, same.
there's probably a gram per kilogram calculation. I know everybody wants to know, well, what's the magic dose? And I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
guessing, I'm ballparking here, but I like to say between 2 and 3 grams for young people, you've got it all covered. 3 to 4 grams maybe for older people,
Okay.
you're good to go.
So 2 to 3 grams. Now that's per feed that you're
Yes.
talking about. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
is there an upper dose across a 24-hour period that you were sort of thinking that has
Yeah,
been
I mean,
shown in the research?
yeah, there is, and it's high. Like it's about 35 grams, and so you can go up to some pretty high levels. Yeah, that would be an obscene amount of protein. Well, yeah, I think you couldn't do it with food. You'd have to have supplements and a lot of branched chain supplements
Mm.
probably. And then you sort of get into some problems, and it's basically that the disposal system gets overwhelmed, and so you get accumulation of these branched chain amino acids, which again, not to belabor everybody with the details, but creates problems with neurotransmitter levels and lots of other issues. So,
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, I was looking on the back of a good quality whey protein supplement. Most of them in per serve of a 30-gram serve will contain somewhere between 2 and 2.5 grams of
yeah,
leucine alone. And, if you're having a 40-gram serve of that, you're suddenly up to 4 grams just in that. And
yeah,
yeah,
you're killing it already with the supplement alone. And if you mix that in with some Greek style yogurt and you've got some milk and you blend a smoothie, smash that back, and then how you can't go any higher. Uh,
nah.
yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, and we'll stay on track. Leucine supplementation versus essential amino acid supplementation. What has that shown?
Yeah, so full deference to my former mentor Bob Wolf, who taught me basically everything I know about amino acids and protein and tracers and all kinds of things. Is that his lab um, did, I think, the majority, and still today does the majority of the work in essential amino acids, and they work, not surprisingly. So essential amino acid supplements are effective. And it's as if you were stuck on a desert island and you didn't have the 11 non-essential, that you'd be fine because your body could make those, but you'd need the 9 essential. So this is sort of a thought experiment because nobody's ever done this study in humans, but Luke Van Loon and I have talked about it. I said, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? So you just feed people the essentials, they should be good to go. There's some speculation that some of the non-essentials might not be as non-essential as we think, but to date, seems to be no big deal. You should be able to survive on the 9, and certainly if you're eating food outside of those 9, you're good to go. But they are effective. They work. You get a full, robust protein synthetic response. Leucine is still the key trigger amino acid, but they work. And a lot of people say, I say BCAAs are I don't know if useless is the right word, but between useful and useless, they're a lot closer to this, particularly when you're eating high protein diet or higher protein diet. So, I think it's fair to people say, "Oh, I just take essential amino acids," and I'm like, "Well, do you eat a high protein diet?" They're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and I'm like, "Well, then again, you're wasting your time. They're not doing anything above and beyond what the food that you're eating is doing already."
Well, I think that's the question, isn't it? Are they useless if you eat a high protein diet? Let's call it 1.6 grams or above.
Yeah, so still, appreciating that 3 of the essential 9 can't do the job. And so I know a lot of people that spend days where they fast, and they tell me because they've read the muscle protein breakdown literature that, and they show that when you give, rats and mice and humans as well, branch chains, the protein breakdown, the rate of appearance of amino acids goes down. So they're like, so I'm fasting, but I'm a little worried about losing muscle. So I take a branch chain supplement. My first response is, well, then you're not fasting. You're taking this branch chain supplement. And they're like, yeah, but it doesn't have any calories. And I'm like, hold on, time out. What do you mean? Like that physics, it has to have calories. And they go, no, look at the label. It says 0 calories. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's just a labeling quirk. They're like, no, that would be illegal. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm going to upset somebody here. And I'm like, in the United States, which is the Wild West as far as labeling and the FDA and everything. These claims have not been evaluated by the FDA as the standard rider for like, eat this shit at your peril, right? So, and I think it's getting a little wilder given the personnel that are heading up food and everything in the US. It's just a labeling quirk, and it's that you don't actually have to declare a calorie value on branch chains, but of course they have calories. And not only that, amino acids, and I think this is a surprise for some people, are what we call insulinogenic. So they stimulate a pretty robust insulin response. You don't need carbohydrates to stimulate insulin. Protein does it as well, but amino acids alone are actually pretty potent. So the whole point of fasting is to keep insulin low and let fat oxidation and lipolysis go rampant. And then you say, but I'm worried about muscle protein breakdown. And I'm like, dude, like in a day, you're losing like 10 grams, maybe 30. I don't know. Like it's in the fifth decimal point of your bathroom scale here. And and they go, well, but and I'm like, but and it pumps up insulin, right? So you're kind of turning off all your, lipolysis and fat burning process. They're like, you know, so
Right.
pop and the bubble bursts, and then they go, well, it's just for a little bit. And I'm like, well, insulin, if anything is exquisitely sensitive to insulin, it's lipolysis. Spike insulin and
It's gone.
fat. It's essentially it's just switched off for some time. So
Yeah. It makes me laugh around that because I think of the carbohydrate labeling issue as well, where they talk about net carbs.
net carbs, yeah,
And it's an American thing. And I
it's
get
amazing.
athletes
Yeah,
going,
one
but
of
the
the
net
greatest frauds that's been perpetuated on the American public. Yes.
complete bullshit. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's carbs.
Yeah.
Carbs
Yeah.
are carbs.
Yeah. Those carbs don't count because these carbs, like, they cancel them out.
Yeah. And the whole argument with insulin as well, like during exercise, they're like, oh, I don't want to take carbs during exercise. And you're like, why? And they're like, oh, because of the insulin response. It's like, dude, exercise is independent of insulin. Like
Exercise craters insulin. So, yeah.
you don't get the insulin response to carbohydrates because it's independent. You
Yeah.
will still get the shuttling of the carbohydrates into the muscle and the liver and whatnot. And they're like, what? But I thought carbs caused insulin spikes. And it's like,
Yeah.
again, it's that lack of understanding, as you're saying, with fasting. It's like, what are you trying to do fasting for? And if you take BCAAs, are you completely ruining whatever it is you thought you were achieving with fasting? And then same with
Yeah.
exercise and carbohydrates, where people are scared of taking carbohydrates during exercise because they're worried about an insulin response, yet it doesn't even exist. And it's like, learn. And I appreciate you giving a science lesson, and hopefully everyone did listen to it, because actually, when you do listen to the science and you then extrapolate the science, it can be very powerful in your understanding of what you're trying to achieve through nutrition, through supplementation, through exercise and whatnot.
Yeah. And, you and I spend enough time on social media to know how confusing things are these days. And, all it takes is somebody who, without their shirt on looks great, or, in a skin tight suit,
You
and
gotta
they
keep your
go,
shirt on. You gotta keep your
yeah,
shirt
yeah,
on more, mate. Like, yeah.
not bad for a guy my age, but, certainly not my advertising feature. Try to use my brain. As my dad said, he often reminded me, he goes, son, you make a living with your hands or your brain. And he goes, and you're not so good with these. Every time I hit a hammer and smash my thumb, but so try and make your living with your brain. It's a hard thing to sort of show off because, the death of expertise is occurring minute by minute on social media. And the popular phrase is someone has done their research. And I'm like, well, here's the big distinction. I do the research. You know, I generate, my group, generates the commodity that somebody else who does their research reads and then interprets. And if they like, puts their spin on it. So, I think the sort of the fair comment to kind of cap off the conversation is there are zero point zero studies that have shown long-term supplementation with branch chains has any beneficial effect. There are some short-term studies that show they reduce the signs of muscle protein damage, and I'll put damage in quotation marks. But it's always with BCAAs compared to nothing or compared to carbohydrate, for example. I'm like, if you put BCAAs head to head with protein, food like whey, um, no difference. So, I'm somewhat mystified that these things, it's like they live another life. It's like a men's razor, right? Remember when men's razors only had one blade, then they had two, then it pivoted, and then they have three, and now it's got a strip. It's as if they're reinvented. So, sports drinks, it's like it was just carbs and water and electrolytes. Then we added some BCAAs and we, marketed the hell out of that. And Prime is a great example. And then we added some caffeine. Everybody goes, oh, I need to get Prime. Prime, it's got BCAAs and it sponsored the UFC. And I'm like, oh, Lord, it's like, it's like it was broken and I fixed it. And it's just, yeah. Well, we all know how it works, right? So
It's money.
it's as if they live another life with each product cycle that comes out. And they are one of the darlings of the supplement industry because A, they're cheap, and B, people seem to gravitate towards them. I don't know whether it's hype or, what,
Well,
but
well, on that, I mean, you did highlight, you highlighted one thing. If you're on a desert island, maybe the essential amino acids would be beneficial.
yeah.
Would BCAAs be beneficial if you're on a desert island and you didn't have any other food?
No, you die.
Okay, so that's
Yeah,
good. I'm
you'd be
glad
dead.
I'm glad we clarified
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah.
um, I will say this, and this is going to be controversial. And look out,
Okay.
I'll probably get a lot
Okay.
of hate mail.
Well, just to be clear, you're saying it, right?
I'm saying this, but I want to understand your point on this. So, a lot of women are influenced by Dr. Stacey Sims.
Right.
She is an advocate for BCAA supplementation for women.
Sure.
I don't understand it in terms of what the purpose would be if they're consuming a high protein diet, which she does recommend for women,
Sure.
which I
Yep.
completely agree with.
Yep.
Why would she be recommending BCAA supplementation for women, either during sprinting exercises, during like to sip on, or before going out and doing a long ride or a long run?
Yeah, I mean, I think the context requires another sort of story around some other biochemical pathways. But again, repeated sprint performance, all kinds of other scenarios where branch chains are supposed to do something. The sum of the human research that's out there is that there's no net effect. And so, people say all kinds of supplements work, and who knows what their motivation for that is. All I will say is this: is that I had the honor and privilege of sitting in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is not a hard place to sit in, because my dad would say it's good work if you can get it, with 29 other experts, and coming up with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee consensus statement on sports supplements. And prior to this edition that was published in various journals, the IOC's position on supplements was they don't work. Which was, everybody knew that was wrong.
Yep.
There's an edge with all kinds of, so athletes were trying these things. So the IOC admitted, well, we need consensus, evidence based, and so we all got together. We wrote a paper. You try and write a paper with sort of 28 other people, with WADA looking over your shoulder as well, which was really tough because we had to tamp all kinds of statements down. But you really come out with protein works, caffeine works, sports electrolyte drinks work, sodium bicarbonate works, and you're kind of like, sodium bicarbonate. I'm like, yeah, changes pH and it's not a huge effect. Beta alanine works, and there's maybe a few others that are kind of on the cusp.
Carbohydrates. Were
Carbs, yeah,
carbohydrates included? Yeah, they were included.
yeah, carbs,
Yep.
like a sport electrolyte drink, and
Yep.
and everybody goes, well, duh, and I'm like, well, it works,
It's a
it works,
supplement. Yeah.
it's like it, you know, and BCAAs are not on the list. In fact, they would get sort of a grade of sort of C minus to a D. And so there are other supplements that are much further up the ladder that I'm kind of like, oh, probiotics. And I'm like, maybe. But at the time when we reviewed it, couldn't say anything. So you have to ask yourself, creatine, excuse me, but not
Yes,
to forget creatine, a
for sure.
small nudge, but a consistent nudge, a supplement that's stuck around. And Branch Chains is not on the list. So again, it's not just Phillips soapboxing up here. It's a group of experts that would stand behind that consensus. So anybody that recommends them, I can't understand it, because when you look at the summit, men and women, I hasten to add, it's not like the often I've heard on social media, there's no research. That's not true. There is research in women, less than men,
Hmm.
but you know, uh, no evidence. And so I don't understand why somebody would recommend them,
No,
particularly
and
if you're eating a high
that's
protein diet.
and it's always been the thing that mystifies me. It's like, well, are you recommending a product that ultimately is taking their attention away from good nutrition practice, which is probably just focusing on eating high amounts of protein in food form and good quality supplement like a whey protein or a plant protein? B, are you wasting their money? And I don't honestly get it. I guess the question could be, is there any harm in taking BCAA supplementation? You mentioned this effect of potentially
Sure.
hyperdriving leucine utilization, but
Yeah,
apart from
I
that,
mean, that's I'll be honest, it's a theoretical, but we know with higher protein diets, people oxidize and burn a lot more amino acids. There's no question. And
mhm,
then if you're adding individual amino acids on top of, excuse me, high protein, then you would drive that even more. I mean, the biggest risk is setting people up for an expectation that something will do something that then it does nothing. And some people say, oh, I feel something. And I'm like, in studies of pain, the placebo response rate is 30%. People on the placebo experience reductions in pain transiently, albeit on the placebo. So, the power of the placebo nocebo is quite powerful in people, particularly where health and wellness is concerned, and people can perceive all kinds of things. So, and again, uh, just look for evidence, look for data, and there is none. And then you're sort of forced to say, well, if that's the case, why would you recommend this? And my answer is, again, useful, useless, a lot closer to this. So much of what you must tell athletes, and like it's really some core basic stuff that the repeated application of is what yields dividends. And so I must sound like a broken record on social media when I'm like, consistency is important, and people go, yeah, I know, and I'm like, but actually that's the secret sauce,
mate,
So
what you just said then is I have just come off my soapbox this last week where I've been so frustrated with people. They're like, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, how about you just follow the program, eat the
yeah,
protein, keep your fat in line, eat the carbohydrates that we recommend in and around your training, do it consistently for at least, let's say, 3 months, and let's see what the result is then. Until then, can you please shut up and stop second guessing everything? And
yeah,
then
yeah,
they wonder why they don't get the results. It's because they bounce from one program to the next, from one
yeah,
supplement to the next, from one diet to the next, thinking, oh, this one's going to get it. But it's
yeah,
only a week of consistency.
yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
which is, it's diabolical, isn't it? But that's it's tapping into a part of even knowledgeable people's psyche. I had a very good friend. This person is smart and reached out to me about a company that's selling oral peptides and said, "Check this out." And I'm like, "Stay away." Oh, but And I'm like, no, like seriously, stay away. And there's lots of reasons. And this person was just
So
swallowed in, and and I'm like, if somebody like that can get pulled into this, like where do we draw the line? Like the mere mortals out there, um they don't have a hope. So hopefully this podcast is gonna maybe X out one, or cause people to be a bit skeptical about BCAAs at least.
look, I hope so. Again, I'm not going to say I've got anything against BCAAs. As you started, I looked back, a company that sponsored our Oracle sailing team when I was in
Yeah,
Bermuda with the
yeah,
America's Cup.
yeah.
It was right on the cusp of BCAAs were right in fashion, 10 whatever years
Sure.
ago. There I am on video going, we need BCAAs. We need leucine, isoleucine,
Absolutely.
valine. These are
Absolutely.
important for muscle protein. I'm on video. Like, it's me talking. And I'm like, oh, shit. Like,
Yeah,
cringeworthy. And
yeah.
I think a lot of us as practitioners got sucked into the mechanistic reviews and the
Yes.
studies around rodents and the hype and the hope of what
Yeah.
BCAAs would provide. However, I think 10 to 15 years on now, I would like to think those same practitioners, including myself, have now read the research that actually shows in humans there is no advantage of zero. Stu's holding up his hand, and so am I.
Yeah,
Zero
but
advantage of
again,
BCAA supplementation, and
I
just
was there
eat
too.
protein. Yeah.
I was there too. Like and we for a long time, I can remember when I was sort of first starting BCR, and I'm like, yeah, we got to study these things. Look at this, and
Yep.
it was, and so the hype is sort of, you get caught up in it, and you're like looking at, and you big names I was reading, and it's like this and anaporosis and and I'm like, oh geez. And then information comes along, and I think it's hard in people believe that science is a static process. They were good. What you said, they were good, but now you said they were bad. And I'm like, well, new data, including my own. So how can I ignore I'm not a scientist if I can't change my mind. And I think it's the hallmark of sort of, being a better, hopefully, scientist. But people see it as a sign of, it's almost like weakness if you change your mind. And I'm like, well, that's what science is about. So
I'd say that's education, isn't it? Like, hopefully you're educating yourself on the latest research and saying, you know what, maybe I got it wrong, and
yeah,
that's all right.
well,
So
I've only been doing the education piece for 28 years, and so hopefully a few people have left the hallowed halls of McMaster with a slightly better idea of what does and doesn't work.
well, anyone I know who has had the pleasure of being lectured by you certainly has that rhetoric. They certainly
Appreciate
feel
that.
a better person for listening to you. So, Stu, mate, on that note, we'll sign off there. But I hope we've left it pretty clear that in both our views, and certainly in your view, and I'll take your view as a expert in protein research, because you do the research, you don't just read it. BCAAs are pretty useless.
Amen.
Well, I won't say pretty useless. I'll say very useless. And
So
I mean,
you come back to the original post, sort of the scratch out,
they're
useless.
useless.
Yeah.
So. Righto, mate. Look, until next time, I'm sure we'll get you on the show again, because it's always a good laugh and an absolute, science lesson for everyone. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time.
Awesome, mate. Thank you.